all that we do, by what we say. Let's keep that in mind, who we speak on behalf of. And now I am going to sadly miss you, but I know you're going to have a great time. And so I'm going to dismiss all the kids to junior church this morning. See ya. Have a great time. Parents, if you didn't get a chance to just sign them in, you can step out and quickly just do that, just so we were able to keep track of your kid. We don't want to lose them, so we want to know that they're there. All right. Well, this morning, I'm going to be talking about something that probably all of us enjoy, something that each one of you might be thinking, you know what, I wish I could do that right now, or I wish I had got more of that last night. We're going to be talking about sleep, and hopefully you don't want to sleep right now. But sleep, and you know what, sleep is one of probably, we're doing this whole series on control, looking at the life of Abraham, and sleep is probably the most unused feature or button on my remote. I don't know how many times I've pressed that button, but I can guarantee you that like 90% of the times that button gets pressed, probably 99% of the times that button has gotten pressed, it's accidental. And it can be frustrating if you accidentally press that and forgot you pressed it, and then all of a sudden your TV shuts off at the wrong moment. But unlike my TV, actually, my TV, when Joanna and my TV dies, it's probably going to be because we didn't let it rest enough. There've been times, because we got it hooked up with our like Amazon Fire Stick, right? And it goes to the screensaver. And there's times when we go back to it and we're like, okay, let's turn on the TV. And we turn it off because we forgot to turn it off previously. So I'm hoping that we won't have to be in the market for a TV anytime soon. But if it dies, that's probably why. And I have to say I'm the worst for that. And you know, I hope it's not the same for me. I hope the reason that I die isn't because I didn't get enough sleep. And I don't think it will be, because I do enjoy my sleep. Although there are some nights, I must admit, when I know I should be going to bed. When I even feel like I want to be asleep right now. And yet, there is some other reason. Oh, you know what? I'll just read on my phone or read something. Actually, you know what? I have to admit, this was unintentional, but last night was one of those nights when I should have been going to sleep, but I hadn't read some of the news that I read, usually read, and so I was like, oh, I just want to quick read that, and so instead of falling asleep, I decided to pull out the tablet and start reading. And yet, we all agree that sleep is so important. So important. As previously being a youth pastor, and a youth, I've gone through my fair share of all-nighters, and I don't think that I can stress enough how important sleep is. After going through an all-nighter, I don't think I have met anyone who is a better them after staying up 24 hours. Okay? I'm not a better person when you keep me up 24 hours. I can guarantee you that. Sleep is important. And it's such a simple thing. And amazingly, even when it looks like you're not really doing anything, a lot can be accomplished by a good sleep. Have you ever thought about how much you're accomplishing by getting that good sleep? Have you had moments where you've been trying to figure out the answer to a solution, and then you give up, you go to sleep, and you wake up? Maybe you prayed about it, hopefully you prayed about it, but you wake up, and then you have that answer. You just, all of a sudden, you're like, oh, this is what it is. There have been times where I've prayed, and then I've gone to sleep, and I've woken up. I've prayed for a family member about something, and woken up and saw a message where it's like, oh, God answered that prayer. There's so much that can be accomplished when we sleep. And not only does a lot happen in our world when we are sleeping. My dad used to work night shift work, and while I didn't really think about what he was doing when I slept, I was getting a lot done when he was sleeping. And some of that stuff was preventing him from sleeping. But a lot can be accomplished when we're asleep. And even better is God can do a lot of things, even when we are asleep, when we are at rest. And this morning we're going to look at how God got things done while Abram slept. Last week we looked at giving. In the past 2 weeks it revolved around this moment where Abram went and saved his nephew Lot, and then he was blessed by Melchizedek, this priestly king, and then this in turn motivates Abram to give generously. He gave 10% of all he had. Then Abram rejects an enticing offer by an evil king to give him, kind of recoup some of what he had given away, or maybe more. But Abram comes off some of these big wins, right? He goes, he rescues his nephew. He gets blessed by this priestly king. He refuses to cave to temptation. He's got some checks in the win category. And this has got to be an exciting moment in Abram's life because things are coming together. And we're going to continue in reading how right after that, God speaks to Abram in a vision. Genesis 15, verse 1. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. That is, what a wonderful statement. Imagine having that vision where God just says this: don't be afraid, I am your shield, your very great reward. This is a reminder that would benefit us greatly on a day-to-day basis. God is my shield, my great reward. I don't have to be afraid. And so Abram's coming off these big wins, and he has this vision of God saying, don't be afraid. And maybe Abram's thinking, well, like, if you were Abram, you'd be thinking, well, like, why are you telling me this? Great things have just been happening. Why would I be afraid now? But yeah, thank you. And at this moment, you kind of look at Abram and you're thinking, yeah, this should be a moment where he's excited and saying, yeah, God, thank you so much. And yet, when we read on, this is Abram's response. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Abram's response to God is not a thank you. It's almost a complaint. It's like, God, what can you give me? Because you know what? I still don't have any kids. And all my stuff is going to go to this other guy, this probably a servant of his. And my family's just going to stop when I die. When my wife and I die. I have no heir, no children. And before we are ready to jump on Abram and say, come on, Abram, where's your faith? Abram, you just experienced a lot of great stuff. Let's be honest. There are times in our lives when we can go through some pretty big victories, some pretty big life wins. And at the end of that, end up saying, God, but this thing's still not done. We can go through some pretty big, some pretty great things and still be left wanting. And you know, after going through that, all Abram went through, especially going and traveling and fighting and rescuing his nephew, I'm sure Abram would have been tired. And you can have some great things happen in your life, and they can leave you exhausted. And in those moments, be like, okay, God, I'm drained. Where are you? Why is this not happening? And so, one of the things that I appreciate about this moment with Abram, he doesn't try to sugarcoat his feelings. He doesn't try to say, you know what, I'm feeling this way, but you know, I should be thankful. Thanks God. Like, no, Abram goes to God and he's just honest. He's honest with God. I mean, God knows where Abram's at, and that's probably why God said, hey, Abram, don't be afraid. Before Abram said anything about his concerns, God said, don't be afraid. But God wants us to tell him, to be honest with him. So Abram goes and tells God honestly what he's thinking and feeling. And this honesty with God leads Abram to a great moment of rest. We'll continue in verse 4 of Genesis 15. Then the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Another big moment. God reaffirms and clarifies his previous promise to Abram. And he does so pointing Abram to look at what he's already created. Now often I would picture this scene as something like this. Abram, come here. Look up and let me know how many stars you can see. And as Abram gazed into the clear night sky, looking at the Milky Way streak across the sky, surrounded by numerous other stars, he exclaimed, but God, that's impossible. There's so many. I can't count them all. And God would reply, well, you're going to have the same issue when you go to count everyone in your family tree. And it all just made sense to Abram. The problem with that picture is that it's just not quite right. It was probably more like this. Abram, come here. Look up and let me know how many stars you can count. Your offspring are going to be just like that. And Abram, a bit puzzled, looked with a bit of a puzzled look on his face, responded, but God, it's daytime. I can't see them. Oh. You see, if we keep reading in verse 12, it says, as the sun was setting. See, earlier in the day, God had said, Abram, I want you to look up into the sky, look at the stars, and tell me how many you can count. And if we were all go outside and see how many we could count, how many do you think you'd be able to count? Probably wouldn't be able to see any. Unless in the sun, it'd be like one. And yet, does that change the fact that those stars are there? See, Abram would have seen those stars growing up. Each night that he stayed up past sunset, he would have known how many stars, well, not a number, but he would have known the magnitude of those stars in the sky. And when God asked him to count them, and he not being able to see them, but knowing that they were there, he says, okay, I get it. God, I trust you. I know, even though I can't see them, I know they're there. Because God, you created them. And God, with this promise, even though I can't see it, I know it's there. And God credited it to him as righteousness. Without doing anything, he was declared to be right because he put his trust in God. And Paul would later pick up on this moment. This one line that we can read past, and Paul, after coming to realizing who Jesus was himself, would write in a letter to the Romans, chapter 4, verses 2 to 5. He would reflect on that line and say, if in fact Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. What does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now to the one who works, wages are not credited as a gift, but as an obligation. However, to the one who does not work, but trusts God, who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. Now, if in your job or previously when you had your job, if your boss came to you with a paycheck and says, I just want to give you this gift, you'd be like, what gift? I worked for that. That'd be pretty insulting. Here's your Christmas bonus. No, this is my paycheck. But Abram hadn't done anything. We can't do anything. See, Jesus, for us, Jesus died long before we were ever born. We didn't do anything to earn that. And when we put our faith in him, that's what God wants. That's how he'll change us. As we trust in him. And James would talk about later how it would then flow out. When you really believe something, it flows out into how you live. So when we rest in God's promises, rest in Jesus, in faith in him, that's a wonderful thing. And because rest is not just something our body needs, it's something our souls need. St. Augustine, over 350 years after Jesus resurrected, after Jesus' resurrection, wrote, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." See, until you have rest in what Jesus has done for you, there's a restlessness on the inside. And sometimes we can forget this. Sometimes I can forget this. I'm so worried about trying to get things done or do the right thing. And I need to first say, okay, no, I can rest in what Jesus did. We can work hard, strive for success, work for victory after victory. We could save our nephew from captivity and then give 10% of or even 100% of all we have. But unless we find rest in the one who created us, rest in Jesus, in God's promises, it's never going to be enough. And so often we get caught in this pattern of trying to get things done or make sure we measure up when we need to first rest. Rest in Jesus and say, because of that, I can live this way. And then God reinforces this wonderful, wonderful truth in how he responds to Abram's desire for assurance over the promise God gives to his descendants. Genesis 15, verse 7 to 21. He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? So the Lord said to him, Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all these things to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. Then the sun had set and darkness had fallen. A smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. This is a weird moment. How does this confirm to Abram anything? If we were to see this play out today, you would probably, if you saw somebody doing what Abraham did, you'd probably call animal services, maybe the police, maybe after everything was happening, you'd call Ghostbusters. At the very least, you'd be left with some good questions. And this is a case where we need to enter Abram's world, Abram's culture, an understanding of him and the people around him. And try and not read this through what's happening in a 21st century Canadian town. Today we would make an agreement by maybe signing documents, maybe even paired with cash deposits. More extensive contracts would require verification and a lot of making sure that you are who you say you are. And if you go get a mortgage, you have to go through a lot of steps, and even proving that the money you have is your money and wasn't received in a wrong way, and it's just this whole process. And it can take just a signature or an e-signature or a little bit more work for us to make a contract. Back then they had this practice of creating a covenant, especially for serious matters. This wasn't just signing a paper. There was a whole ceremony involved. And it involved meaningful sacrifice. While it wasn't explained, we see that a covenant is made, it says so, but it's not really explained in this moment. But thankfully, we can find insight onto this practice if we read in Jeremiah 34. It actually records a moment where a covenant was made long after Abram had died, and a very good covenant. The problem was, with that one, it wasn't kept. Jeremiah 34, verses 10 to 11. So all the officials and people who entered into this covenant agreed that they would free their male and female slaves and no longer hold them in bondage. They agreed and set them free. Great covenant. Unfortunately, but afterwards they changed their minds and took back the slaves they had freed and enslaved them again. In this moment, a covenant was made to free slaves. And yet, their hearts changed because of selfishness, evil desires, and God condemned it as He gave instructions to Jeremiah to speak out against it. And we read in verse 18, Jeremiah 34:18, "Those who have violated my covenant and have not fulfilled the terms of the covenant they made before, I will treat like the calf they cut in two and then walked between its pieces." This is a severe sentence. But it would have come as no surprise, should have come as no surprise to the people that had made that covenant. See, for people in that time to make an important covenant, they would not just make a covenant, they would cut a covenant. And as gross as it may sound to some of us today, these animals were butchered and split, and the parties involved in that covenant would walk between them. And it was this act with a visual representation to say, if I don't hold my end of the covenant, may I be like these animals. May I become like these animals. It's essentially, if I don't hold my end of the deal, my life is on the line. And so that is what we see happening here. It was a life-binding agreement. Covenants, anytime you see the word covenant in the Bible, it is a big deal. So when God asked him to bring the animals, Abram probably knew, or he knew what was going on because he set it up and he prepared it accordingly. But something happened. Much like you or I could honestly admit, when we're talking to God sometimes late at night and we doze off, Abram fell asleep. He fell asleep. And yet, in a thick and dreadful darkness, God spoke to him and showed him what was happening. See, God spoke the promises and revealed some of what would happen way after he died, which you can read in Exodus. And when the time comes to confirm this covenant, Abram's asleep. Now, I've never been a sleepwalker. I know some people are. And it's pretty hard, though, unless you're a sleepwalker, to perform the act required by this covenant if you are asleep. And so Abram's sleeping on the ground. And while he slept, God was at work. It's very hard to get someone to agree to something when they're sleeping, unless you try and translate their sleep talking or snores in your favor. But while Abram slept, God was making an agreement. When the sun had set and full darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. Just as God has appeared as a cloud and fire different times. When we did our temple series last year, we looked at how these symbols represented God leading or being present. And here appears these symbols which move between the animal pieces. And God establishes and confirms his covenant with Abram. And all Abram has to do is sleep. Get a good night's rest. He doesn't have to promise anything. He doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have to earn it. God says, I'm making this covenant with myself. And in a sense said, if I don't make this happen, it's on me. I don't think you can get a better promise. You can't get a more solid covenant than that. And in that promise, we see the same thing as Jesus died on the cross before for us, any of us were even born. And all we have to do is have faith in what he did and who he is, and trust in him, and get a good night's rest. And as Abram accepted, as he rested in what God had promised, as he believed, he lived out a life, though not perfect, that would come back to continually rest in God. And he gave us that model that we too need to rest in what we've been promised. It's probably one of the most obvious truths, and yet we, and I mean me too, we miss it because we think we're responsible for making things happen. Yet we cannot do only what God can do. We can't save ourselves. We can't fix ourselves. You can read all the self-help books you want. They'll never make you perfect. Only God can. And so we need to trust in him. We need to have faith in Jesus. That's whether you've never had faith in him before or you've been living a life of faith. When you face a conversation you're not looking forward to, face a day that's coming up that you've got marked in your calendar and you're stressing about it, worrying about it. When you face results that tell you the way things are, you know what? I'm going to rest in my Jesus, my Savior, my King. Knowing that at the end of the day, what he promised is going to happen. Abram had faith in God, and God said, that's enough. And in that rest, Abram went on through mistakes and triumphs, knowing that God would see it all through. So where do you need to work on resting more? Hitting that sleep button and saying, God, I know what you've said to me, and I'm resting in that. Where do you need to rest in Jesus? Maybe it's right at the start of saying, you know what, Jesus, I know I can't do this all myself. I know I am what the Bible calls a sinner. You're not perfect. You've made mistakes. You've hurt people. You've probably been hurt by people too. And saying, God, I can't fix myself. Maybe it starts there, saying, just being honest with God. Saying, but God, I see what Jesus did, and I'm going to trust in that. Please forgive me. And I trust that you have. Maybe it's remembering to rest in Jesus. You've lived a good time a long time as a Christian, and you need that reminder today. You know what? The things that I'm worried about, the things that keep coming to mind, I'm gonna rest in Jesus. And when you rest first, you are more productive. Not to mention it feels better. Right? When you have a good night's rest, you can get more done. And so we first need to rest in Jesus. If you were to go tonight without sleep, tomorrow would probably not be as a productive day. Don't get spiritually miserable because God is telling you to rest in Jesus and you're not listening. I'm going to invite the team to come forward to prepare us to lead us in song again. And I'm a big fan of rest. And I don't practice it enough. This is always something I have to keep coming back to. And sure, there are times when I'm lazy. Doesn't mean I'm resting. I love to sleep, but to get a good sleep also means not staying up late, not watching TV till 2 a.m. See, as much as I like to stay up late, I know that sleeping in, which I would typically prefer to do, I know that doesn't actually rest me as much as going to bed early and waking up at a good time. And so to get a good night's rest, I have to plan for that. And so some of us, maybe we need to plan for a rest. Saying, you know what, I've got this thing coming up. I know I'm going to need to be rested for that. I'm going to take some time and rest in Jesus to refresh my understanding of His words. To speak with Him, to share with Him honestly how I'm feeling. I think that's a good... Every day presents its own challenges. It's great to plan to say, I'm going to take some time to rest in Jesus because of what's ahead of me today. If you're not feeling tired now, if you are feeling tired now, get some rest. Maybe after the potluck you need to go have a nap. Or maybe you need to take some time to just sit and speak with God. And as we sing together, take some time to rest in what we're singing, rest in who Jesus is. as we previously sang, I speak the name of Jesus over you. Rest in who he is and what he's done for you.